Welcome to my YouTube channel, Tony Style Motivation. This isn't just another motivational page. This is a wake-up call. Here, we don't sugarcoat. We don't play small. We break cycles, we rewrite mindsets, and we take back our power one truth at a time. If you're tired of chasing people who don't value you, if you're done being stuck in the same patterns, if you're ready to become the strongest, most unshakable version of you, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button, because the real shift. It starts now. Let me tell you what most people never understand. Silence isn't just a lack of words, it's a declaration, it's a decision, it's a shift in power that changes the entire emotional landscape. And when you're dealing with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, someone who relies on emotional distance to feel safe, that silence isn't empty, it's disruptive, it's destabilizing, it's the one move they never expect you to make, and the only move they have no defense against. You see, avoidants are masters of retreat. That's their play. When emotions rise, they pull away. When intimacy deepens, they detach. When you come closer, they go silent. Not because they don't feel something, but because feeling too much terrifies them. They've trained themselves to stay in control by staying disconnected. And the moment you react, when you chase, when you beg, when you try to pull them back, you confirm their strategy. You validate their belief that they can't control the emotional tempo of the relationship by simply withdrawing, and they do, over and over again. But something powerful happens when you no longer play your part in that dance. When your silence doesn't come from confusion or anxiety, but from a deep, unshakable clarity. That's when the power shifts. That's when they no longer have the advantage, because they're wired to expect pursuit. They're conditioned to anticipate your emotional reaction. But when you go quiet, not to punish, not to manipulate, but because you've made peace with the truth, that silence becomes louder than anything you could ever say. It's in that silence that they start to feel it. Not right away, not always instantly, but they feel it in the absence of your energy, your attention, your effort to make things okay. That silence becomes a mirror they can't look away from, a mirror that reflects back not just their behavior, but the reality they've been avoiding. Because now, for the first time, they're not in control of the space. You are. You're no longer sending texts just to keep the connection alive. You're no longer calling to bridge the gap. You're no longer putting in energy hoping they'll meet you halfway. You're not doing any of that. You've gone still, and that stillness is what changes everything. Because let's be honest, avoidants don't fear abandonment same way others do. They fear vulnerability. They fear emotional exposure. They fear being seen. But when your silence doesn't come from a place of emotional chaos, when it's calm, composed, grounded, that's when they start to lose control, because they can't read you anymore. They can't categorize you as reactive. You're not reaching for them anymore, and that lack of pursuit tells them something far more powerful than anger ever could, that you've stepped out of the dynamic. You're not emotionally accessible in the way they've grown used to, and they're not sure if or how they can't reach you again. Now they're left alone with their own thoughts, with their own patterns, with their own walls. And suddenly, the silence they once used to feel powerful becomes the very silence that makes them feel powerless. It used to be their weapon. Now it's your freedom, because you're no longer afraid to let the space exist. You're no longer uncomfortable with not knowing what happens next. You've stopped negotiating your worth in the hope that they'll finally recognize it. And that's what makes this move so potent. It's not just about saying nothing. It's about no longer needing a response. That silence is your declaration. That silence is you saying, I've seen enough. I've felt enough. I've given enough. And not because you're bitter, but because you finally understand that the only thing you can ever control is how you show up for yourself. And when you do that, when you embrace the power of that stillness, not only do you shatter their illusion of control, you reclaim your own. There comes a moment in every relationship, especially one involving someone with an avoidant attachment style, where you realize you're not being valued. Not because you're not valuable, but because your emotional availability has become expected, taken for granted. And when that happens, your presence doesn't feel powerful anymore. It starts to feel like a given, like a utility, like something that's just always there, waiting, Avoidants don't necessarily seek out emotional safety. They seek out control, and they find control in the predictability of others. The more they can anticipate your reactions, your words, your love, your forgiveness, the safer they feel. Not safe in relationship, but safe from emotional responsibility. Because if they can put you in a box, if they can label you as the one who stays, the one who always gives, the one who always tries, then they don't have to look at their own behavior. They don't have to be accountable for their distance. You become part of their comfort system, not as a partner, but as a supplier, a provider of emotional nourishment they won't admit they need. That's the trap, and the only way out is to become unpredictable again, not in a chaotic way, not in a toxic, erratic, manipulative way, but by reclaiming your value, by reintroducing mystery, by no longer offering yourself as an emotional resource on demand. The silent move, stepping back, going inward, removing your emotional labor, doesn't just pause the cycle, it disrupts it completely, because now you're no longer the supplier, you're not the fixer, you're not the regulator of their chaos, you're no longer the balm for their inner wounds, and suddenly you're not so easy to define anymore. That's what shifts the dynamic. That's what breaks their rhythm, because you're not acting the way they expect you to. You're not trying to soothe their discomfort. You're not reaching out just to make sure they're okay. You're not showing up like clockwork to rescue them from their own emotional avoidance. You've shifted from supply to mystery, and mystery is what calls people forward, not begging, not pleading, not proving. It's the energy of someone who knows their worth so deeply that they don't need to explain it. And when you embody that energy, when your silence communicates, I am no longer available to be used while being unseen, it lands in a way words never could. They start to wonder, they start to question, they start to feel your absence not just as space, but as consequence. Because before you were predictable, you were dependable, emotionally generous even when it cost you, and they relied on that. They relied on your patterns, but now you've gone quiet. You're not making noise to be heard. You're not filling the silence to keep the connection alive, and that mystery, your new unpredictability, it doesn't signal instability, it signals growth. It shows them that you've stepped into a deeper relationship with yourself, one where you're no longer proving your value through effort, one where your energy is sacred, one where your love must be earned, not assumed. You're no longer chasing them with your presence. You've become unavailable without explanation, and that creates a gap they can't navigate, because the part of them that was always in control is suddenly unsure. Unsure of what you're thinking, unsure of how you feel, unsure of whether they still have the emotional upper hand. They don't know if you're done for good. They don't know if you've finally seen through the illusion, and that uncertainty, that's where their false sense of security begins to collapse. You become the unknown, the one thing they've worked their entire lives to avoid, because avoidants don't fear losing you. They fear losing their grip on how you see yourself. But now, you see yourself clearly. And the moment you see yourself clearly, they no longer hold the pen to your story. They lost access to your energy the moment you stopped handing it out. They lost access to your heart the moment you stopped giving it to someone who couldn't receive it. They lost access to your light the moment you turned it inward. And that mystery you now embody, the mystery of someone who knows their value, is the beginning of your freedom and the end of their control. Updated saved memory, there's something most people don't realize until they're on the other side of it. When you're emotionally connected to someone with an avoidant attachment style, you're not just trying to have a relationship, you're unintentionally regulating their nervous system. You're calming storms you didn't create. You're soothing triggers that weren't yours to fix. You're holding space for someone who often gives you nothing back but distance, and what feels like love, what feels like connection, is often just you carrying both your emotions and theirs on your shoulders. You're the one adjusting your tones so they don't feel overwhelmed. You're the one walking on eggshells so they don't pull away. You're the one keeping the peace, calming the conflict, shrinking your needs just so they don't feel pressured. And what happens over time is this. Your nervous system becomes exhausted. You're running on empty while they continue operating in avoidance. They feel regulated because you're the one doing the emotional heavy lifting, but you start feeling anxious, depleted, unsure, because you're not just trying to connect. You're working overtime to manage their internal chaos. They've trained themselves to disconnect as a form of safety, and unconsciously, you've become their safety net. But here's the truth. The moment you pull back, the moment you stop regulating their system, something powerful happens. The balance breaks. The control collapses, because they never learned how to manage their emotions on their own. That was always your job, not by agreement, but by default. And when you make that one silent move, when you stop trying to stabilize the connection, when you stop being their emotional airbag, that's when the shift begins. Suddenly they're left with their own thoughts, their own reactivity, their own emotional world, and no one to buffer it. No one to translate it, no one to soften it. They're left alone in the space they created, and without you there to absorb the emotional tension, their carefully built illusion of control starts to fall apart. Because they were never actually in control, they were just leaning on you to manage the emotional weight they refused to carry. They needed your calm, they needed your empathy, they needed your warmth, even if they never said it, even if they acted like they didn't. And now that energy is gone, not in a loud, confrontational way, but in a calm, clear silence that speaks volumes, you've stopped playing the role. You're no longer holding both ends of the rope, and that's the moment they feel it. Not when you send the long message, not when you ask for closure, not when you try to explain what you need. They feel it when you don't say anything at all, when the energy they were used to feeling from you just disappears. When the emotional frequency they depended on to stay grounded no longer exists in their atmosphere, and that silence, your new boundary, your new peace, doesn't just make them uncomfortable, it leaves them exposed, because now there's no one there to absorb emotional consequences of their avoidance. They have to sit with it, they have to feel it, they have to live inside the same nervous system they spent years trying to escape. And in that space, something becomes undeniable. They never learned to handle intimacy because they never had to. You always did the work for both of you. You kept them connected without making them feel overwhelmed. You gave them access without requiring vulnerability. You offered consistency in the face of their inconsistency. But now, the moment you stop, they're not just missing you, they're missing stability. They're missing the very thing they took for granted. And no matter how emotionally avoidant someone is, the body doesn't lie. Their mind might tell them they're fine, but their nervous system, it knows it feels the loss. It recognizes the silence not as a threat, but as a shift in power, because your silence doesn't mean absence. It means you've returned home to yourself, to your breath, your peace, to the rhythm of your own heart. And when you choose that, when you choose to stop regulating their emotions and start nurturing your own, their system doesn't know what to do with the void. Because the control they thought they had wasn't real. It was borrowed. And now, they're left with the only thing they truly feared feeling at all, without you there to soften the impact. Avoidants don't just avoid connection. They build stories to justify that avoidance, stories that protect them from accountability, stories like you're too much, you're too needy, I just need space, or you're always overreacting. And if you've been close to someone like that, you know exactly how those words start to shape your identity. You start to question yourself. You wonder if maybe you are too intense, too emotional, too available. You shrink. You quiet yourself. You begin to believe that loving fully is somehow a flaw. But let me tell you something right now. What they were doing wasn't truth. It was projection, a defense mechanism, a way to protect themselves from having to confront their own emotional limitations. Because if they can convince you that the problem is you, they never have to look in the mirror. They never have to admit that they struggle with closeness, that they fear intimacy, that vulnerability terrifies them. And the more you react, the more you try to prove your intentions, explain your heart, defend your feelings, the more their story strengthens. They say you're too emotional. Then when you break down trying to get through to them, they feel validated. They say you're needy, and when you text again just to check in, they feel right. They feel justified. Their narrative holds, but when you go silent, when you stop trying to correct their version of you, something powerful happens. Their projection hits a wall of stillness, a wall of clarity, a wall where your energy no longer feeds the lie, because you've stopped giving it attention, you've stopped defending yourself, you've stopped dancing with the distortion, and now the echo chamber they used to live in, the one where they could point the finger and walk away without looking back, is empty. There's no response, no emotional charge, no conflict to use as proof, and that silence doesn't just confuse them, it disarms them, because their power wasn't in reality, it was in reaction. Their control came from being able to trigger you, to keep you just unsettled enough to keep engaging, and now, you're not engaging, you're not correcting, you're not chasing truth inside someone else's story anymore. You're simply letting it collapse, and that collapse doesn't happen in a loud, dramatic way. It happens slowly, internally. They start to feel the weight of their own narrative. They start to feel the absence of your energy, your voice, your clarity, and they begin to ask themselves questions they've spent their whole lives avoiding, because without you there to contradict them, they have to face something they're deeply unfamiliar with. Silence that doesn't beg for understanding, silence that doesn't demand validation, silence that simply is, and it makes them uncomfortable not because it's cruel, but because it's clean, it's unarguable, it doesn't push back, and it doesn't apologize. Now they're left with their own words, echoing back to them. The things they once said to control the narrative now ring hollow, and without you to take the blame, they're forced to ask the one question they've never been ready for. What if I was wrong? That's the power of not feeding the projection. That's the strength in stepping out of the script. Because the moment you stop playing the role they cast you in, they're left on stage with no one to perform with, and suddenly their story starts to unravel, not because you exposed them, but because your absence exposed the truth. You were never too much. You were never needy. You were just willing to love someone who wasn't ready to be seen. And now that you're gone, not with vengeance, not with drama, but with calm, quiet self-respect, they feel it deeply, because the control they thought they had wasn't over you. It was over the version of you they could manipulate, and now that version no longer exists. You've outgrown the need to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you, and that is when their projections shatter, when you stop defending the truth and simply become it. Avoidants are used to patterns. They're used to people reacting in predictable ways, either by chasing them when they pull away, or collapsing in pain when they create distance. That's the cycle they know. Push and pull, retreat and return. They don't consciously plan it, but deep down, they expect that your nervous system will follow theirs, that you'll keep orbiting their emotional shutdown, hoping for scraps of connection. They expect you to show up in one of two ways, persistent or broken, and that's where they feel secure. Not connected, but in control. But the one thing they never expect, the move that completely disorients them, is when you do neither. When you don't chase, when you don't beg, when you don't fall apart, when you don't react at all, not because you're suppressing your emotions, but because you've finally chosen peace over the pattern. That's the moment they feel it, not just as confusion, but as threat, not a threat to their safety, but to their illusion of control, because your silence isn't heavy anymore. It's not filled with waiting, it's not soaked in sorrow, it's clean, it's calm, it's detached, not disconnected, but detached in the most powerful way. You're not angry, you're not holding a grudge, you've just decided to stop dancing to the same music, and when that happens, something in them starts to shift. Even if they don't show it, even if they don't say a word, they feel the energy drop, they feel the rhythm break, and now they don't know what's coming next. For the first time, they're not leading the emotional tempo, you are. And what makes that so impactful is this: you didn't fight for it. You didn't argue your way there. You just stopped playing a role that no longer fits, and that stillness, that complete removal of your emotional availability, becomes the loudest wake-up call they've ever received, because it's not dramatic, it's final. It's not about punishing them, it's about freeing yourself. They might even test you. They might throw out little signals. They might pop up just enough to see if they still have a hold on you. And this is where everything changes, because when you don't respond the way you used to, when you don't light up at breadcrumbs, when your system no longer jumps at their inconsistent energy, they're left stunned, because they thought you would always be there. They thought your love was permanent, unconditional, self-sacrificing. They thought they could keep you around without ever meeting you where you needed to be. But now, you're no longer accessible, not just physically, but emotionally. And that's what really shakes them. It's not the silence that hurts them. It's what the silence means. It means the game is over, the control is gone, the pattern is broken, you've evolved, you're not waiting for their approval, you're not waiting for their love to feel whole. You've taken all that energy and poured it back into yourself, into your peace, into your clarity, into your future, and that's something they can't predict. That's something they don't know how to respond to, because you're no longer functioning from fear, you're not afraid to lose them, you're not afraid of the void, you've already been through the fire. You've already felt the pain, and now you've chosen not to relive it. Your silence isn't just absence, it's transformation. It's the clearest signal you've ever sent, not to them but to yourself. It says, I no longer chase chaos to feel alive. It says, I no longer confuse unpredictability with passion. It says, I finally see my worth clearly enough to stop offering it to people who can't see it. 2. That's the moment they realize they've lost something far greater than your presence. They've lost the version of you who stayed, the version who explained, the version who waited, the version who believed that if you just loved them hard enough, they'd finally get it. But now you get it. If this message hit you, don't just sit with it, act on it. Hit that subscribe button if you're done playing small. Share this with someone who needs to wake up. This is Tony-style motivation, where silence becomes strength, pain becomes fuel, and your comeback becomes unstoppable. Until next time, stay bold, stay grounded, and never chase what you were born to rise above.